I'm talking to you from Darkinjung country, and BirdLife acknowledges the traditional owners of the country on which we live and work, and we pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. We recognise and are grateful for the immense contribution of Indigenous people to the knowledge and conservation of Australia's birds. So I'm Judy Harrington, I'm the Chair of BirdLife Southern New South Wales, and I thank you for attending our webinar. We have a fantastic response. I'm just hoping everything works this evening. I was particularly interested, I was reading BirdLife International's vision, and their vision is to see a world where nature and people live in greater harmony, driven by the belief that local people working for nature in their own places are the key to sustaining all life on this planet. Each of our Southern New South Wales projects engages our members and other people in the community, guided by our wonderful management teams and dedicated leaders. I'd particularly like to thank all of our project managers. As well as the speakers for our projects this evening. Our other projects include the BirdLife Discovery Centre at Sydney Olympic Park, Richmond Woodlands KBA, the key biodiversity area, Birds in Backyards, and many, many other local projects. We are all standing together to stop extinctions. Our rules for the evening: everyone's been muted, videos off. If you have a question, add it in chat. If you put your cursor across the bottom of the screen, you'll see chat there. We'll try and answer a few questions at the end, which may not happen, but we'll make sure all questions are recorded and we'll answer them if we possibly can in our next e-news. So thank you, everyone. With no further ado, we shall start. Our very first speaker is Cathy Goswell, who's a member of our committee and also a long-time, very active worker from Cumberland Bird Observers Club in Sydney. She's talking about the Regent Honeyeater planting project, which is our longest running BirdLife Southern New South Wales project, having begun in 1993. And Cathy's speaking on behalf of the committee, and I'd like to particularly thank the leader of this team, Ian Patterson. So thank you, Cathy, if you would like to share your presentation.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to everyone and update them on this, the progress of this important long-term project. Since 1994, volunteers, including many BirdLife members, have been planting trees as part of the Cathy Valley Regent Honeyeater Recovery Project. The Regent Honeyeater was once common within the temperate woodlands of southeastern Australia, particularly the box ironbark woodlands on the western slopes of the Great Dividing Range. Regent honeyeaters are highly mobile and will travel long distances in search of flowering events for their favoured eucalypt and mistletoe. There are small numbers of areas which they regularly used for foraging and breeding, of which the Cathy Valley is one of the most important. The spectacular cliff-lined Cathy Valley is situated on the western margin of the Blue Mountains, about 50 kilometres north of Lithgow. Much of the suitable habitat within the valley has been cleared, and what remains is fragmented and degraded. Almost all of the suitable habitat is on freehold land, with the notable exception of Cathy National Park. After the Regent Honeyeater was nationally listed as endangered in 1994, a recovery plan was developed by a team which comprised representatives of relevant Commonwealth and state government agencies, NGOs including BirdLife Australia and BirdLife Southern New South Wales, university researchers, and Taronga Zoo. BirdLife Southern New South Wales initiated the Cathy Valley Regent Honeyeater Recovery Project in 1993 to implement actions proposed in the recovery plan. The project complements recovery activities being undertaken within the valley by BirdLife Australia's Woodland Birds for Biodiversity project and researchers from the Australian National University. The planting program has been funded primarily by grants from federal and state government programs. Plantings are currently funded until 2023 by the federal government's National Land Care Program through Central Tableland's Local Land Services. Since the first planting in 1994, there have been 2 plantings per year with only a few exceptions. 2,000 to 3,000 tube stock are planted per planting, comprising a mixture of trees and shrubs. Eucalypt species, including white box, Eucalyptus albans, yellow box, Eucalyptus meliodora, and mugger ironbark, Eucalyptus sideroxylon, which are the key local eucalypt nectar sources for the Regent Honeyeater. Planting sites are fenced if required and ripped in advance. Slashing may also be required prior to planting. 80 to 150 volunteers generally take part in each planting. Tube stock, which are propagated from local provenance seed, are planted into the rip lines by volunteers. Plants are watered in by members of the New South Wales Land Rover Owners Club using trailer-mounted tanks and bladders. Planted sites are periodically monitored to assess survival rates and identify any maintenance actions which may be required. Sites are selected according to a number of criteria. Blocks are preferred to narrow strips, as narrow strips favour noisy miners, which like edges and compete with Regent Honeyeaters for resources. When the project began, it was difficult to find suitable planting sites, as there were few landowners interested in plantings on their properties, and we had to make do with what we could get. As a consequence, many of the initial sites were small patches or narrow strips. The largest site in 1994 was only 1.2 hectares. However, as local awareness increased, more landowners began to express interest in plantings and in providing larger sites. This enabled us to become much more selective in choosing where to plant. To date, 272.4 hectares of land on 52 properties throughout the valley have been planted with 142,000 trees and shrubs. In addition, 4 hectares of remnant woodland on 2 sites have been protected by fencing to exclude stock. The planting program has helped to promote awareness of the plight of the Regent Honeyeater within the local and broader community, and provide an opportunity for community members to participate directly in recovery activities. The project's longevity has been an important factor in engaging effectively with the local community. Two sets of surveys have been undertaken to date to assess what birds are using the planted sites. In the first set, no Regent Honeyeaters were recorded, which is not surprising given that the age of the oldest plantings was only 13.5 years. However, a total of 82 bird species, including 8 threatened species, were recorded. No Regents were recorded during the second set of surveys either, but 87 species, including 10 threatened species, were recorded. There have now been 5 sightings of Regent Honeyeaters on planted sites, and records are expected to increase as the plantings mature. Unfortunately, the Regent Honeyeater's survival still hangs in the balance. Habitat loss and degradation due to drought and fire has been the major factor responsible for the decline of the Regent Honeyeater. While it will take many years for the benefits of the Kapiti Valley plantings to be fully realised, the revegetated areas will provide additional habitat for Regents in one of the most important breeding and foraging areas, and are already providing habitat for a range of other threatened and declining species, such as the vulnerable grey-crowned babbler and speckled warbler. A number of other factors have further exacerbated the population decline of the Regent Honeyeater over the last 20 years or so, and are inhibiting recovery. Factors such as reduced breeding success, increased nest predation, competition with noisy miner, mistletoe dieback, and the small size of the population. Actions to address these specific threats are being actively pursued as part of the National Recovery Program. The COVID-19 pandemic caused some disruptions to our planting schedule in 2020-21, but the recent lifting of COVID restrictions has cleared the way for a return to our normal 2 plantings per year. The planting dates for 2022 are the 30th of April to the 1st of May and 20th and 21st of August. Details of how to participate will be communicated in our monthly e-news and on the BirdLife website closer to the dates. There are many individuals and groups to be acknowledged and thanked for their work. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Cathy. And thank you everyone who helps, who volunteers, and all of the people who come and do that planting. It must be so thrilling when you actually see some Regent Honeyeaters there. So from woodland to shorebirds. Our next speaker is Gerry Duane. Gerry is the coordinator of the shorebird counts in the Parramatta River estuary area. He's talking about the importance of shorebird monitoring and why we conduct those surveys. Thank you, Gerry.
Thank you. Okay, I have to say to start with, well, thank you, Judy, for giving me the opportunity to talk about shorebirds. And they are my favorite bird, shorebirds, and they are really the jet setters of the bird world, as we will see in the next few slides. And these are the flyways. These concepts have come up over the last number of years, the concept of a flyway. And we have the American flyway, the African, and also, of course, the Australasian flyway. And because these birds are global and they travel all over the world from the north right down to the south and back again the same year, and to conserve shorebirds, we need to understand the factors that are affecting the declining populations, and also the impact of different activities throughout the flyway. The flyway the Australian flyway is in partnership with a number of organizations, including BirdLife, and because of their global nature, traveling north and south with the seasons, they are under threat from a lot of activities. This particular flyway shows the Asian and the Indian flyway, And also we have the East Asian Australian flyway. And onto the side of our flyway here in Australia, we also have the West Pacific flyway. These are the stopover sites that are on the flyway. Australia is well placed to monitor our shorebirds because Australia is at the end of the flyway, and I think it's 1/2 of the population of the world is living in Southeast Asia and China, and of course Japan. Now, as I said, the shorebirds are under threat. The eastern curlew is critically endangered. The bar-tailed godwit, the race that's in North Siberia, and the great knot. The endangered ones are the red knot and the lesser sandplower. And of course, the bar-tailed godwit, the race from Alaska that we get here in Sydney, that's also vulnerable. The Yellow Sea. Stopovers are very important because most of the birds need these stopovers. They fly maybe 1,000 kilometers in one trip, and then they stop and then they continue on. And the Yellow Sea is a major area for shorebird, for the food that shorebirds need. The Yellow Sea is under the control, particularly of China. And I think it's a definite fact that 90% of the bar-tailed godwits from Alaska use the Yellow Sea as a stopover and feeding area. Also, the spoonbill sandpiper, there are only 600 spoonbill sandpipers left in the world. And these are principally feeding in the Yellow Sea. This is a slide from the Yellow Sea and just showing the numbers of shorebirds that are in there. I haven't been there, but it is magnificent. And all the photographs that I've seen and the videos confirm this. In the background, you can see the big development. And China has been what they call reclaiming the Yellow Sea for a number of years. But the good news is that in January 2018, the Chinese agreed to a moratorium on reclaiming coastal wetlands. This is our curlew sandpiper, and it's experienced, I think, an 80% decline in the last 20, 30 years. This is a shorebird. This is the curlew sandpiper. You can see the Australian population had 30,000 individuals and in 1980, and now it's gone down. In 2007, it's gone way down to maybe 2,000, 3,000 individuals. This is a slide that I got from Judy Harrington, and it's the curlew sandpipers that have been counted on the Parramatta River. And you can see from this slide that there are maximums of, well, there used to be 160 slides in 1993, 160 birds in 1993, and now we're down into very small numbers. When I came to Australia first in 1986, my first bird watching place to visit was Hen and Chicken Bay. And I remember seeing a large flock of curlew sandpipers. And I actually thought they were dunlin, because up in the Northern Hemisphere, dunlin is the usual bird, and a curlew sandpiper is a very rare bird. But they were curlew sandpipers. And little did I know that in my lifetime, they would be reduced to very small numbers. This is our star migrant. the bar-tailed godwit. You can see the flyway here again. And only recently have they found out that the bar-tailed godwit is coming straight down from Alaska to New Zealand and to Australia. And this number, E7, I think the record has been broken now, but 11,000 kilometers in 8 days, non-stop. And that is truly magnificent. Now, on the way back, that's the autumn migration, the autumn in September, October. And then on the way back in the Australian or the northern spring, they go back through Asia up into the Yellow Sea. And that's why that Yellow Sea is so important. These are the monthly counts of the bar-tailed godwit on the Parramatta River. And you can see that the maximum count is starting on the left-hand side in 1993 was perhaps 300 birds. And now it's gone down to about 75 last year. And I believe this year, it perhaps could be maybe 65, a bit less. It's been declining every year. That's our bar-tailed godwit. 75 in actual is the number that's up there from last year. Now this is Hen and Chicken Bay, where our bar-tailed godwits frequent and hang out. This slide was taken in 2006, and you can see that the mangroves, there's just a few small mangroves there. I can tell you it's almost a forest.
9 minutes, Gerry.
Oh, I'm very sorry. Hen and Chicken Bay is one of our sites. Mason Park is another site. This is the Waterbird Refuge, and that is a site that has really been created by people in SOPA, which is a magnificent story, but I better go. When I was bird watching a few years ago, the only place you could see the red-necked avocet was up in Newcastle, but now they're down here in the Waterbird Refuge. Undisturbed high tide roost sites are vital. These are the godwits on Tingara Boat Jetty. That's the only spot they've got to roost. How to get involved? That's my email address and Wendy Fox. And I should say we'd welcome more people to do our surveys. It's very important. And it's only in the future, I believe, that this data will really show how important it was. It reminds me when I saw the flock of 80 odd curlew sandpipers, and today you can't see one. And that's only 30 years ago. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerry. To be sure, they're wonderful birds and that amazing migration. We just hope we can continue to monitor and learn so much more about them and try to protect their habitats. Our next speaker, Elisabeth, is going to speak about some of the work that we are doing to improve shorebird habitat locally. Elisabeth is on our committee. She's the head of our conservation subcommittee. And I thank you, Elisabeth, if you'd like to share screen and share your presentation.
Can everyone see that okay?
Yes, we can, Elisabeth.
Yes, Cathy.
Great.
I mean, yes, Elisabeth. Sorry.
This project is, excuse me, removing juvenile mangroves from a tidally influenced urban wetland. And it's part of the larger project of restoring this wetland so that it's once again healthy habitat for shorebirds. Oh, where is Mason Park? It's this image shows most of it. The northern end is just cut off a bit. It's south of Sydney Olympic Park in Homebush in Sydney. It's linked to the Parramatta River via Powell's Creek, which you can see the straight line, well, at a slight diagonal across the image. It's an extension of the Sydney Olympic Park estuary system of mangrove forest, salt marsh and tidal saltwater ponds, and one of a very few possible shorebird sites remaining along the Parramatta River. Most of them have disappeared under parkland and other development. Shorebirds have declined in Sydney and elsewhere, as Gerry has just been talking about, but they are still found. Some return to Sydney for the whole summer. Others use Sydney sites as a temporary rest point on their way to elsewhere in Australia, and some overwinter in Sydney itself. So another image of Mason Park, it's in the bottom third of the screen. You can see where it is in relation to the Sydney Olympic Park wetlands and also the Parramatta River itself. So why begin this project, and is it important? This is actually part of my story of becoming active in BirdLife Southern New South Wales, and a combination of factors came together to create this project. So in February last year, BirdLife Southern New South Wales held a forum with the theme of shorebirds, and it attracted a lot of interest, and it reinvigorated my interest in Mason Park, which I'd first seen in 1997-98. It is one of the monitoring sites for the Parramatta River monthly surveys that Gerry coordinates, and that itself is part of BirdLife's National Shorebird Program, so it is significant. And surveyors had seen a deterioration in the Mason Park wetland. For several years, no migratory shorebirds that previously visited had been seen, and mangroves had expanded to an extent that it was no longer good shorebird habitat. So early last year, I started to wonder how BirdLife could bring about improvement. And as a trained bush regenerator, I knew about mangrove removal at other urban sites, and this gave me the impetus to initiate some action here. If it's successful, it will make a difference to the fortunes of shorebirds in Sydney. It will also benefit the salt marsh and various other wetland birds that use the site. What is the history of shorebirds and Mason Park? Very briefly, since urbanisation, it's a history of neglect and abuse for a lot of the time. It was used as a dump till the late 1970s. The hydrology has been altered. It's been cut off from the surrounding wetland areas and from Powell's Creek. But in the past, there were 5 migratory shorebird species common here, and other occasional species as well. A phase of restoration in 1998 included the installation of a sluice gate to improve tidal flushing, with mixed success. And since 2000, there's been intermittent culling of mangroves, but not so much consistent management of the site as a whole. But the nearby Waterbird Refuge in Sydney Olympic Park shows how a degraded wetland can be restored and managed successfully for shorebirds. So we have a good example nearby. So what are the habitat needs of shorebirds? Well, they're quite specific for feeding and for roosting. This image shows a combination of habitats in the wetland. You can see it in the foreground, plus small mangroves in the middle ground, now removed, and a dense belt of mangroves in the background, which will be retained. Who needs to be involved in a project like this? Well, all urban projects often mean multiple interested agencies. In this case, Strathfield Council is the land manager, and a collaborative relationship with council is essential. Fortunately, Strathfield's Biodiversity Conservation Strategy and Action Plan 2020 to 2030 identified Mason Park as a high priority. So I knew we'd be able to get something happening here. But nevertheless, it took a while to find the right person in council, like the person who could decide and work with us. Another stakeholder is New South Wales Fisheries, because they are concerned with the health of fish stocks, and they issue licenses for removal of mangroves in particular circumstances. Greater Sydney Local Land Services has a keen interest in the site. They had previously funded mangrove removal at Mason Park and have a long involvement in shorebird sites in southern Sydney. Sydney Water Corporation has an easement through the wetland, so they are a significant stakeholder. And basically, their plans are likely to decide the wetland's future in the long term. Also essential are volunteers. So we put out a call for assistance through the Parramatta River Shorebird Surveyors with the help of Gerry as coordinator, through our monthly e-news, through birdwatching organisations and other networks. And lastly, we need the assistance of experts, people with wetland expertise, shorebird ecologists, and other consultants. So what are our achievements so far? COVID delayed negotiations in 2020 to start up the project, and it has also affected our timetable this year as well. But nevertheless, in 2020, from September to November, we held 6 working bees with an average of 10 volunteers and a focus on the central part of the wetland. It was not an ideal time of year, so we tried to minimise our intrusion on breeding stilts, which were not very appreciative of our presence. Benthic sampling has also been carried out by a small team of BirdLife volunteers monthly since August 2020, and with the support of Sydney Olympic Park. Earlier this year, a grant from Greater Sydney Local Land Services to Council funded a contractor to clear the remaining expanse of dense small mangroves at the northern end and some mature ones. And this year, we were able to resume work again last month and this month, and we've held 3 working bees with record numbers of volunteers registered, both experienced people from last year and new recruits. And our reward is that we've been seeing sharp-tailed sandpipers there on several occasions, which is really exciting. What's the volunteer experience been like so far? Well, we keep turning up and getting muddy. It is strenuous and we're exposed to the elements, but the visible progress we're making is very rewarding for us, I think. So are project records important? They certainly are. And these images show some before photos at the top and the matching after photos below. So you'll be able to see some of the difference that we've made here. Documentation is essential, and the minimum is before and after photos. Also short reports to the major stakeholder, i.e. council. And I must emphasise, thank you. I must emphasise it's essential to value volunteers, to have regular communication, give clear expectations, give email updates, recognise their different levels of ability and fitness. And if you're a coordinator on a voluntary basis, be prepared for the time commitment. So, finally, other progress. The benthic sampling shows that when the mud is soft, benthic life increases in abundance and species, and that means food available for the birds. This year, we signed a memorandum of understanding with Council, which recognises our ability to conduct the project. Council is undertaking an operational plan, and a first draft is expected soon for that. We now are holding guided nature walks in conjunction with our working bees, so the community can learn, can see us in action, and we hope to recruit local people. So to conclude, our intervention will remain necessary. Probably ongoing annual visits will be needed to cull the seedlings, and we're always welcome new people who are keen to help, because without volunteers, this project cannot happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Elisabeth. A really important project, and it was so thrilling to see a couple of Sharpies there. I've seen them there too. It was wonderful to see. And we just hope that we're maximising the habitat there for any poor shorebirds who do come this way. There's somewhere appropriate for them to go. We'll go back to the country again, back to Cowra. And I'd like to welcome Dr. Julian Reid on behalf of the Cowra Woodland Bird Project to speak about their work. another one of our really long-going projects, and it will be wonderful to hear about your work, Julian. So with no further ado, Julian and the Cowra Woodland Birds Program.
Good evening. Yes, the Cowra Woodland Birds Program is a project of BirdLife Australia, and we do many things. Tonight I'll mainly focus on the high quality surveys we've developed and maintained for the last 19, almost 20 years, the very accurate vetted database of those bird survey results and the statistical analyses and reports. But we've done lots of other things, a lot of habitat restoration, a lot of outreach, and there are too many people that have put in months and months of work on the committee and in other ways to list individually, but they've done an amazing job. Is this showing all right to you? I can
yes,
see
it is, Julian. Looks
Thank
good.
you. Good. The original goal was to reverse the decline of passerine woodland bird species, and there are 6 of them you can see here, which had been identified by me and others as declining woodland birds in the late 1990s. And I think all these 6 species have since been listed in New South Wales. And in fact, it was our current chair, John Rankin, of the Cowra Woodland Birds Program, who got in touch with me in 2000, and the late Dr. Sue Briggs and I were travelling up through the Western Slopes doing woodland bird stuff. And John had contacted me, we called in, he said, I'm concerned, we've lost our yellow robins. It was a common refrain I was hearing from farmers, which John was then, right throughout the Western Slopes. The robins was the red robins particularly is what farmers often noted. In fact, as the statistical models have shown us that the yellow robins in fact are doing okay from our long-term surveys. And John's very pleased to tell me that in the last couple of years they've reappeared in his garden. So that's good news. Where is Cowra? It's the sort of central Western Slopes, 300 k's west of Sydney. You can see the Blue Mountains to the east. And notice how it moves from grazing country in the eastern half of our study area through to cropping land, the patchwork cropping land, and the Lachlan River runs through that way, through the guts of the study area. And there are a few major mountain ranges where all the remnant vegetation persists, particularly the Canimbla Range, and we've got the Iluni Range down here, the ranges to the east with the Wyangala Dam, and you can see that gradation from cropping lands to in the northwest to the grazing lands in the east. Particularly, there are quite different vegetation types, a lot of open forest, extensive areas of good quality open forest, a lot of it in national parks or other reserves, and then this heavily cleared, 98% cleared productive. It's very productive farming land in the guts of the Cowra Shire, in the central parts, alluvial valley floors. We've been monitoring 125 sites since 2002, 95 sites are active. And I want to give you a brief introduction to the avifauna. It's a very interesting avifauna because it's a blend of eastern birds and western birds. It's rich, it's high diversity. There are lots of bird species in the region. I think we recorded 250 odd now. 30 species are listed as vulnerable or endangered under New South Wales legislation in the area. And you can see there are particular groups, iconic groups like the parrots and cockatoos, 27 species of honeyeaters, 6 species of Australo, Papuan robins, 7 species of thornbills. It's the only place I know where you can see 7 species of thornbills in the one area. We even have a site where all 7 species have been recorded. But, 3 species of whistlers. You can see the lovely Gilbert whistler there, as far east as it comes. It's on the eastern limits of its range. And the other pachycephalids, the larger pachycephalids in that group, the grey striped thrush, the crested shrike tit. Oh, we're missing something. And the crested bellbird has gone extinct in the Cowra region. It was last recorded just before we started our surveys. The malleefowl went extinct decades ago, and 2 species probably, and as well as the Regent Honeyeater, are effectively extinct. The bush stone curlew, the plum-headed finch. So there are problems. In such a heavily cleared landscape, there will always be those problems. I think we've had about 8 records of the swift parrots during our surveys, which is over 5,000 surveys now. But other species are becoming very, very rare. Little lorikeet, little eagle, just to name a few. Fortunately, some of the vulnerable species are doing well. The lovely grey-crowned babbler, which is one species we're really concerned about, given their near extinction in Victoria, but in the central western slopes, they're doing fine. Earlier this year, we launched the report of the statistical analyses and report of the first 17 years of surveys with my co-author, Nick Nichols. And we can see that, we've got the noisy miner showing an increase, the crested striped tit showing a decline, and the grey-crowned babbler a steady sort of trend over the 17 years. So fortunately, some of these vulnerable species are doing okay. The speckled warbler is holding its own, couldn't fit a time term to the model. That is, it's stable, population is quite stable. Superb parrot, like most species, goes up and down across the 17 years, but it's doing fine. It's one of our most abundant species in the region. But most of the vulnerable species are not doing well. The brown free creeper has been one of the hardest hit. You can see its declining trend overall. Diamond firetail declining strongly in one habitat type, the moderate quality small woodland remnant habitat type. Hooded robins, we hardly see at all anymore. Restless flycatcher is not listed, it should be. It's a declining woodland bird species. And the dusky wood swallow is going down badly. We see all these declining trends, and the fact that we hardly see any hooded robins now on our sites, despite having increased the number of sites. Many other species are declining. The peaceful dove, red-rumped parrot, southern whiteface, we hardly ever see any more on sites. The Fuscus honeyeater is almost gone. And there's a list of the species which showed marked declines there, 14 species. And in fact, there are more species which are showing increases in their reporting rate over time. And a politician might say that's good news, but it's not. Biodiversity is about conserving the whole suite of species of a vertebrate group, in this case, birds. And there are these 20 or 30 species we're most concerned about. The major reason why a lot of those smaller woodland bird species are on the decline is this species, the noisy miner. They're just starting to occur in the more frequently in the open forests, up in those big forest blocks in the ranges. They already have 100% occupancy of the small degraded box woodland remnants in the most productive, heavily cleared landscapes. And this is where a lot of those woodland bird species are declining from this intermediate quality class of habitat, the moderate quality class, sort of 5 to 15 hectare patches. And these were on the slightly lower down the slopes in the study region, and therefore more productive sites, which the noisy miner likes, but also it's the niche of some of these archetypal declining species like the wood swallows, the trillers, the robins, that prefer that habitat to the upland infertile forests. I won't go through the conclusions in any detail, but despite a lot of our species showing an increase in trends over time, the real problem is those 20 to 30 species which are showing a marked decline, and they are the species associated with those more fertile landscapes which have been too heavily cleared. And then there's another 10 or so species we don't see enough to be able to say anything about their trends through time. Noisy miner is the major problem. There are no current solutions to the noisy miner problem, except that some of our results from revegetation at scale, I'm talking about 5, 10 hectare patches of re-veg in block shapes, as were described earlier in our first talk, they provide habitat with a shrubby understory, which the noisy miner doesn't like, and provides good woodland bird habitat. But I'm talking, we need to up that, as everyone would know. We need to get about 10% of that heavily cleared landscape back into native vegetation if we are ever going to turn around this persistent long-term decline in woodland birds. We do have fun. We have great social events. We organise lots of things for the wider community, as well as our surveyors and tree planters and the farmers. We should do more, but we have restricted times. We're often short of surveyors, so we're often short in summer and in winter. It's too hot for some and it's too cold for others. So if anyone else would like to get involved, unfortunately we've lost our great survey quartermaster, Malcolm Fife. He's still alive, but he's just retired from the job of organising the surveys. So I'm afraid it's me now. And they're the dates for this year, this next year. Please put them in your calendar. And thank you. Thanks, Judy.
Thank you very much, Julian. That was brilliant. I had the pleasure of going to Cowra when you launched the program, and your report, and I haven't been for years, and it was a wonderful experience joining in. Just moving on very quickly then, I'd like now to welcome our Holly Parsons, and she's going to talk about the Powerful Owl project, owl. Holly has been the founder, of course, of our Birds in Backyards project, and I've worked with Holly for many years. So without any more fuss, please. Thank you, Holly.
Thanks so much, Judy. I'm really happy to be along tonight talking to you all about an amazing bird, the powerful owl. I'm going to give you some good news and I'm going to give you some pretty sad news. I hope that everybody has had the opportunity to see one of these amazing birds. If you haven't, I highly recommend it. They are an extraordinary species. They are what we call a large forest owl. They occur primarily through forest habitat, unsurprisingly, through the east coast of Australia. So from sort of central Queensland all the way down along the coastline of New South Wales into Victoria and just eking into South Australia. They're classified in each of the states that they're found in as threatened or vulnerable. But really interestingly, despite being a threatened species, they have taken up residence in our major cities. And Sydney in particular is a real stronghold for the population. And so what we've been doing over the last 10 years is running a Powerful Owl project where we've been watching these species through the amazing help of citizen scientists who are all trained and learn about these amazing birds and give up their time to monitor them for us. So what we're trying to do with the Powerful Owl project is understand how life in the city is impacting this threatened species. So our volunteers look at where these birds are found. We monitor them through the breeding season and look at how they are acting, where they are breeding, what nest trees they are using, ultimately how successful they are at raising and fledging their chicks. We look at what they eat, what sort of landscape they are living in, and sadly, we also now look at causes of death and injury in the population. And we do this for a couple of reasons. So we want to, of course, conserve these birds. And so when we can get this really fine scale information on exactly where these birds are through the landscape, being territorial, it means that we can provide on-ground conservation advice for land managers on how to best mitigate any threats to this species. So we do this through the Greater Sydney region, up till about Newcastle, down to just around Wollongong, and of course out to the Blue Mountains for the most part. We also run this project in Queensland now as well. And so we then go and train our volunteers, investigate these impacts, and are able then to provide these conservation outcomes for the species. And none of it would happen without this amazing group of citizen scientists. These are just a small number of, 600 odd people that give up their year They go out through winter, in particular when the powerful owls are breeding, to monitor this species. They keep a close eye on their birds, and they have this real affinity for the birds on their patches. They discover new locations. They report really exciting and really often heartbreaking findings as well. I want to also give a particular shout out to Dr. Beth Mott. She, up until recently, was the project officer in charge of the Powerful Owl project in Sydney and has been in that role for a number of years now. She's still helping us out in a voluntary capacity, but she has an amazing wealth of powerful owl knowledge in her head and is a real champion for this species. So here's a quick summary of the breeding season to date. So powerful owls breed over winter, as I said. So generally they're in the hollow sort of April, May, with the chicks fledging in usually September. So now there is all these lovely fluffy powerful owl chicks getting around the Greater Sydney region. When we started the Powerful Owl project 10 years ago, we had anticipated that we might have 25 to 30 pairs of powerful owls in Sydney. And now we're at, well, I've said here 263. I actually heard yesterday of another pair, so 264 known territories of powerful owls in Sydney. There are 161 sites that are active this year, so where we know we have powerful owls in a location, and 121 of those have undergone a breeding attempt that we know of. So that means that we have seen them going into a hollow and, you know, hopefully there have been chicks. There have been chicks emerging from about 89 to 90 sites now. So what we're seeing is, you know, a good number of powerful owls getting out around Sydney. And so you can see in the table below at the bottom there, I've just given you some stats over the last 5 years. We can see 2020 was a particular hard year for powerful owls. We had a low number of fledging birds. We had a low fledging rate. So the number of chicks per pair was quite low. This year, it looks like in terms of getting chicks off the nest, the birds have bounced back a bit, but as I'll share with you soon, sadly, the other side of the coin is the mortality events that go on as well. So while this is looking quite promising, we know life is really tough in the suburbs for powerful owls. I'll also mention a couple of other outcomes from this year. So we've, between myself, volunteers, Beth, we've given 71 different conservation event pieces this year. That could be talks for community groups or radio or other media. But really importantly, it's also things like local land management advice. So we can provide information on exactly where birds are located in different LGAs, we're down to the particular nest tree in a lot of cases. And that means that when land managers might be doing some slashing and weeding, or when there are hazard reduction burns that are planned, they can get in touch with us and find out exactly where the birds are and if it's an appropriate time of year to be carrying out that activity. And then we can also feed into development application processes as well and do that quite regularly. Again, providing advice on where we think there might be issues of conservation concern for the species because of a particular DA that is going on. So here's just a quick map of the Sydney birds this year. There's a lot of lovely colours on there. Don't worry too much about it. In terms of what they all mean, what I really wanted to highlight was just how widespread they are in particular locations. So you'll notice up through the northern beaches along Avalon Beach, there you can see in through the northern suburbs of Sydney, in particular, is where these powerful owls are found. They love good, strong green canopy cover. And that is where they get that sort of habitat. We get some pairs in through sort of a bit of Western Sydney, and there is also a good population down in the south as well. But where you have extensive clearing and minimal tree cover through, the majority of urban Sydney, you do not get these birds at all. Of course, COVID put a dent in many plans for people to go and monitor birds, particularly those that are a distance from their homes, which means that we do have a number of sites that we just haven't been able to monitor this year. It's something like 40 odd. Hopefully we'll be able to get an idea of whether these birds are still around in those areas in the coming months. So as I said, it is not always easy living in an urban area if you are a powerful owl. So alongside all the great information on how the birds are breeding, we get lots of reports of where they are getting injured, or sadly in most cases where they are dying. 70% of our records that come in are of birds that have already been found dead. And I think we've had 77 events, injury or death events this year that have been reported to us so far. You can see sadly that car strike is the most common cause of, well, death really for powerful owls, and that has held true for the last few years that we've been monitoring the mortality events. But you do see there's a huge range of risk here. So we get birds that have collided with glass balustrades or glass pool fencing. We have had electrocution events. There's been about 4 electrocution events this year that we know of. There's been drowning events. There are birds that have obviously succumbed to disease. We also see attack by other animals. That includes dog attacks, but also daytime bird attacks. And so while we have, I think, about 7 or 8 events that have resulted in the birds actually having to come into care, we know that fledglings in particular get harassed a lot once they leave the hollow, particularly by things like currawongs and magpies. And so that makes that first year of life really hard for a young powerful owl, and we often see high mortality at that time. And of course, there are often a lot of cases where we just simply don't know what the cause of death is. Thankfully, we've been working with a wildlife vet and starting to examine some of these issues in a little bit more detail.
9 minutes, Holly.
Okay, let's talk rat poison, people. Unfortunately, rats are really tasty if you are a powerful owl. We'd noticed in the last few years that there has been a shift in diet for powerful owls, where they were primarily feeding on possums, flying foxes, and daytime birds. We saw the arrival of rats in pellets. Unfortunately, that rang alarm bells and has sent us down a rabbit hole, I guess, looking at the impact of rat poison on this species. So I'm going to give you a very, very quick rundown into these really big words of anticoagulant rodenticides, which are basically rat poisons. Rat poisons act as blood thinners. And so the rat, the rodent, will consume some bait, and simply after a certain amount of time, it can be a few days, it can be a week, it could be more, they bleed internally and die. These anticoagulant rat poisons fall into 2 categories: first generation rat poisons and second generation rat poisons. First generation rat poisons includes things like warfarin. They require multiple doses of the poison in order for it to take effect in the rodent, which means that it has to come back a few times to take some bait, but they break down in the body of the rodent quite fast. Then in the 90s came along these second generation rat poisons. Second generation means that they kill the rats with a smaller dosage, and these are the chemicals to look for, but they accumulate in the body. They don't break down very quickly, they get stored in the liver. And that means that in the time that it takes for that rat to die, which, you know, as I said, can be a week, they are effectively running around like little zombies. They can be eaten by birds of prey, by a whole range of wildlife, and ends up accumulating in the systems of those wildlife. Unfortunately, most of the products you can buy now, rat poison wise, are these second generation products. It's been really well demonstrated internationally that particularly raptors or birds of prey are at real risk of these second generation poisons. And consequently, we've seen that in places like Canada, a lot of the US, and in the EU, they've restricted sale. You can't actually buy these products off the shelf. They're only available for licensed professionals. In Australia, I think we were a little bit slower in the uptake in looking at this issue. And so we've now seen, though, the second generation poisons affecting over 40 different native animals, including possums, which is likely a really high vector for our powerful owls. We've seen it in wombats, we've seen it in lizards, where it's a particularly good transport mode to get into raptors as well. And we see it, of course, in some of our birds, including boorbooks, and most recently in Tasmanian wedge-tailed eagles. Sadly, now we also see it in powerful owls. So I'm just going to very quickly highlight the amazing efforts of our volunteers, of members of the public who report dead birds to us and enable us to get a hold of these creatures for necropsy, particularly to Beth Mott and our wildlife vet, Dr. Aditi Siram, who have been necropsying these birds and getting our liver samples. We don't collect the liver samples for creepy purposes. We collect them so we can send them off to a lab for testing. And unfortunately, our first lot of samples have come back a short time ago and found that there are really high levels of these rodenticide products in powerful owls in Sydney. So you can see in this graph here, when we look at exposure levels of these rat poisons, we have likely fatal and toxic levels. To identify exactly what would be a fatal level for a powerful owl would mean we would have to poison a powerful owl. So there are these sort of, I guess, international standards that we compare everything by. Sadly, what you can see here is that if you look on the vast majority of the graph, we have the vast majority of our powerful owls that we sampled showing some impact of toxicity caused by rodenticides. So only, I think, 3 samples had either no rodenticide in them or a very small amount of rodenticide, so small that it wouldn't actually impact them. And we did have 3 that would be very, very likely to be entirely fatal for those individuals outright.
I'm Holly.
Okay, I'm going to keep on just very quickly to showcase that, you know, we are looking at where these levels of impact are across the landscape in Sydney. So these dots each represent a powerful owl that died and was sampled for this test. The yellow show the sublethal rates, the blue show the fatal levels, and the green, which you can see down south, show the ones that had likely no impact of rodenticides. I'll just point out that sublethal isn't necessarily a good thing. When a bird is showing sublethal effects of rat poison, it basically means that they are sick. And so their increased risk of nutritional deficiencies, of inability to fly properly, increased risk of car strike. And so all of a sudden you see that the urban space that is already really challenging for a powerful owl becomes more so if you are throwing rat poison into the mix. We also know that there wasn't just one rat poison chemical showing up, there were multiple chemicals showing up in these birds. And the most common one is this brodifacoum. And that is the most common rat poison that you can get at your supermarket or hardware store. I'll just quickly point out that we're not finished here. This is just really the tip of the iceberg, and we've got more samples to send away and more research to examine, looking at what impacts where the birds are in the landscape and how urbanised the area is impacting where they are coming into contact with the rat poison, and whether these are young birds, old birds, male or female, that are being impacted as well. The ultimate aim of this is we want to get some of these products removed from public sale. So we are feeding into the Australian Pesticides and Veterinary Medicine Association's rodenticide review, which is open now. They are currently considering second generation rodenticides and whether they should be available for public sale at all. So if you want more information on what we're doing, I'm going to send you to actforbirds.org/rat poison, where you can see the current work that BirdLife Australia is doing on this. We are currently, as I said, working on a review for the APVMA, giving them the data that we've had that shows that this is impacting on our threatened powerful owls, and also running a campaign targeting Bunnings and asking them to be, I guess, a leader and withdrawing voluntarily these products from sale. These products have been removed elsewhere in the world. It's only a matter of time, but we need to be very loud, and we need to put forward the good science that shows that this is having a significant impact on a huge range of birds and other wildlife. Thanks very much.
Oh, thank you, Holly. Such an important project, and you know, lobby Bunnings, these are also important, and look up those sites. So thank you, Wendy. Would you start my presentation? I had great difficulty earlier and I couldn't start my presentation at all. I have to have a beautiful assistant who's going to work my presentation for me. So here we go. So I'm talking about our EagleCAM project. I'm going to have to be fairly slick as we're somewhat over time. Secrets revealed, what we've learned from EagleCAM, just some interesting facts and figures and some beautiful pictures of what we've learned. Thank you. Thank you, Wendy. So this is a mural from the Marama Healing Space down on the Parramatta River. Goolabee is the white-bellied sea-eagle, and you can see the sea-eagle flying there over his territory on Wongal land, all the creatures in the river and the forest and the mangroves. Thank you. So this is a partnership, research agreement working with Sydney Olympic Park and the New South Wales Office of the Environment. And our objective is to observe and learn about white-bellied sea-eagle biology without interfering in their behaviour or the processes that they undergo in the natural environment. They're wild birds, and we're privileged to observe their breeding behaviour. Thank you. So some of the things we've learned are pair bonds. They're faithful to one another. Our very first male, when we first observed birds breeding, he disappeared. A young male moved in for a short time, and then our current male. When his partner disappeared, a new female turned in. So there are a few birds floating around. We don't see many on the Parramatta River, but they are faithful. Thank you. Nest building, both help to build the nest. Both bring sticks, gathering them in their beaks and manipulating them. Massive nest, about 2 metres across and even up to 2 metres high. Thank you. Lined with green leaves, as you'll see. This is our current nest, at least 20 metres up this tall ironbark tree. Thank you. And we are able to watch their behaviour with the cameras that we've installed in these trees. So both incubate. The female only incubates at night, or at least I should say, only the female incubates at night, on very rare occasions otherwise. Rain, hail or shine, you can see her looking quite miserable there. You can see the green leaves lining the nest. An incubation we found is around 40 days. Thank you. This is an interesting picture because you can see the wind has parted the feathers on the bird's breast, and you can see the brood patch, which is the area of bare skin which keeps those eggs warm. Thank you. We've seen every year a definite trend for delayed incubation between the two eggs. Now, remember, they're laying in June. This was the 27th of June when this picture was taken. So the first egg's laid, and she just leaves it uncovered for quite some time. Thank you. Day and night. So this year, the eggs were laid 80 hours apart, and that first egg was uncovered for 14 hours total at night, that cold June weather. Bit less during the day, and as the second egg is approaching, the incubation time increases. Thank you. You can see at night there, not even sitting on the egg, just keeping a guard, so quite cold. Thank you. And again, during the day, it's interesting, you can see the birds tucking their toes as they're approaching the eggs, and she uses her bill to roll them. Thank you. So this year, the eggs were laid 80 hours apart, and they hatched just under 50 hours apart. That gives the second chick a much better chance of catching up. Otherwise, there's a considerable difference between their size and their development between the two chicks. Thank you. So just looking at some figures, just very generally, and actually this is slight errors here, but I'm not going to worry because I'm having to use Wendy to manipulate my slides for me. If we refer to mortality as eggs that failed to hatch or young that died in the nest. Over the 13 years we've been watching, mortality of 10. 1 year, neither egg hatched. Another year, the little chick died just at 1 day, and the second egg didn't hatch because an intruder, another female, came and was trying to disturb them from their territory. We had another bird that had a very wet weather, possibly just one of the little birds died on the nest. Also, there's a particular parasite, a protozoan parasite called trichomoniasis, causes trichomoniasis, which causes a lesion to grow in the little chick's throat, causing its death. Thank you. But if we call nesting success young that have fledged, again, there's a slight error in the figures here. Birds that fledged defined as young that flew from the nest. 13 are assumed to have left the area, and in fact 3, or in fact it's 4, died after fledge that we found. Last year, one of the fledglings had a deformed foot and had to be euthanized. It was taken to care, but it was deemed to be in constant pain, and it was euthanized. Another one had beak and feather disease that you hear in parrots, and that bird also had to be euthanized. So all sorts of problems happen with our little chicks. Thank you. Another issue is sibling rivalry. Some birds, some raptors, have what's called siblicide. The young bird will kill one of the young will kill its sibling. Sometimes it just always happens. We haven't seen that, but we have seen some rivalry. This is some, you can just see in these pictures, one chick is picking at its sibling, which then cows into submission, and the stronger, bigger chick receives the food. We've seen that this year, but not too seriously, and it quickly passed. Thank you. In 2018, no, that sibling rivalry was quite severe. There was a period where little food was brought in. The stronger chick just pecked the second into submission. Thank you. And it just outcompeted it completely. And the little chick, in fact, died from starvation. So it wasn't killed by its sibling, it died from starvation. Thank you. Just going through then what we've learned about incubation and hatch. So the little chick, it pips, the little beak is showing, we can hear it peeping. Thank you. The first little chick hatches, helpless, pink, wet, damp, and its peeping has stimulated the second egg to hatch as well. You can just see on the right-hand egg, there's a little tiny pip, it's just pipping, thank you. And the parent tucks its toes in, tucks its talons in, and you can see there the 2 little chicks now, one shell's still there, she'll probably remove it or squash it into the nest. A deep cup lined with green leaves, thank you. As they grow, the parents feed them bill to bill, thank you. Tiny morsels of food, thank you. Starting to get little feathers. One chick there is a little bit submissive, thank you. All those pin feathers starting to come through, they're starting to get bigger and stronger, thank you. Lots of whitewash all over the nest. Standing now, standing to receive their food, lots more feathers, thank you. Flapping wings, jumping up and down, exercising, getting stronger, thank you. Even lifting right off the nest, which is just incredible. You almost feel they're just going to get blown off course, thank you. Till they finally branch, which means just they're able to flap to a branch nearby and then back to the nest, thank you. This year, the younger chick, in fact, branched first at 77 days, and the second at 81 days. So that's SE28 on the left and SE27 on the right. Thank you. Constantly harassed by other birds, particularly currawongs, swooping and swooping. Just the currawongs must have been nesting nearby. Raptors are public enemy number one to lots of birds, other places magpies, but it was the currawongs that gave them hell this year. It's not a giant currawong, it's just the angle. Thank you. So when it fledged, off it went, chasing off, being chased by all the other birds, which disturbed the birds and made it just go too far away from home. Thank you. You can just see they're constantly hassled. Thank you. So post-fledged life is hard. The SE27, the older bird, we lost track of them on camera. We weren't sure where they were. We got permission. We go into the forest. We were looking on the ground, and we actually found this beautiful young bird on the ground. We are able to take photographs. It can fly. It fledged, but inexperienced, not good at landing, crashed to the ground. And we were a couple of days, we were following them and trying to work out where they were. We weren't sure if the parents were feeding them. Thank you. Until we had a report from a member of the public that one of the birds was right in the middle of Sydney Olympic Park in Cathy Freeman Park. Dandy was flopped on the ground initially, but looking very dejected and miserable. We were fortunate that one of the security rangers was capable and game to catch it, and it was taken into care. Thank you. We are waiting to an announcement from National Parks as to where that bird will be released. We're hoping it will be. That's what we're waiting to hear. We have just a brief summary of development there. So from hatch up to about week 15 when they fledge. Thank you. Just very quickly going through prey because I'm very conscious of the time. We know they specialise in catching fish and silver gulls, the birds we've been watching. We haven't seen them pirate from other species because there are no other big raptors there, and they probably scavenge. Thank you. All sorts of interesting things. This year from the top picture, they've brought in lots of silver gull nestlings. There are birds nesting down in the bay, and they pinch little chicks from there and bring them in. Even an ibis chicks we felt this year. All sorts of fish, mullet, bream, whiting, eels, catfish. Thank you. Their prey can also cause big problems, not only the contaminants in the river, but in 2012, they were fed a fish that had a fishing line and a big hook in it. 2 young birds were tangled in line. Although we normally don't intrude, we don't intervene, we got permission as they were so close to fledging, removed the birds, the vet was able to remove that awful hook. And the good news was that they both fledged successfully that year. Thank you. Once they're getting big enough, they're they eating food themselves. One mantles over it, tries to catch it from the other. Thank you. They brought in some strange things. One day a young fox. Thank you. Turtle. Thank you. And just to show you, at 9 weeks, the female had done the vast majority of the feeding, with the male a few feeds. At about day 25, 27 there was just one feed that day, and that was a time when we actually did see some increased sibling rivalry, but it then passed again as more food came in. Thank you. Who brought the food? In those 9 weeks. So she did most of the feeding, but he brought most of the food. You can see they brought in lots of birds, fish, a few things we weren't quite sure what it was, an eel. Occasionally they'll bring in a live fish or a live eel. But as the birds got bigger, as the young ones got bigger, she in fact started bringing in more food. Thank you. And this is what it's all about. Little chicks with big full crops, plenty of food. And we hope, and we're looking forward to seeing, we hoped we'd see the fledglings from this year hanging about with the parents, learning the ropes, learning how to be eagles. The second young nestling. We've not been able to find it again. We're not sure. We hope it's out there wild and free, and we'll find out about the other very soon. So thank you. Next. Thank you, Wendy. All a wonderful team of our EagleCAM team. I'm sorry we've had to just rush so quickly. We're running out of time, but thank you all. It's a wonderful project and engages so many people all over the world. They're wonderful eagles. Thank you. We've had a few questions, everybody. We've basically run out of time, but we will address your questions and answer. We've had a few questions that we can refer to the people who did those presentations. One question I could just answer very briefly is, why are powerful owls killed by cars? Well, they're flying across the road, they might be after prey, they might be blinded by cars, and sadly they're just killed. So I thank everyone for your attendance today. It's been wonderful. We need to do it again. It's just, I feel like we barely touched some of our subjects, but thank you all for watching. And remember, we're all standing together to stop extinctions, and we act for birds. Thank you all so much.